35.
Yeah. How'd you find this one?
So this one obviously takes a while to work out because of the key that it's in. And it's very interesting. I think a lot of musicians look at this key and immediately feel fear. And that's kind of but it's like an unusual thing, because why would playing in one key be more frightening than playing in any other key? You still have to have a centered pitch no matter what you're playing in. So just because it's C major doesn't mean that it's going to suddenly be more in tune. Now, obviously, it doesn't resonate as much. So I think that's the big thing, that when we're slightly off the natural keys of the instrument, we have to really do an awful lot of our intervallic training. I think that was the big thing for me. I didn't find a huge amount in this was super challenging apart from centered tuning and being able to feel free within that.
It's interesting because we were saying in our pre-chat how these studies, now that we're like the finish line is in sight, you sort of see these recurring themes in the pauper studies, and it's sort of like, oh yeah, I can put this skill into this block. And I think this one's definitely pauper, does so much of this in a number of the different studies of finding these weird keys and forcing us to really like use our ears tonally. I mean, and in addition to the fact that this is a D flat major, there's a lot of sort of inharmonic relationship. So, even right at the very beginning, you get it like bar 3, we have this string crossing thing where we're going from a G flat crossing over to a B natural. Now, that's actually, inharmonically, it's a fifth, isn't it? Even though it's written as a diminished sixth?
Is that a great thing to actually mention? I totally agree that pauper quite often messes their heads. If I see a sixth, I find it very easy to pitch. But when he writes it like that and it's actually a fifth, it's like brain melt city, isn't it?
Yeah, tons of that. There's tons. I know it is hilarious. It's like that thing we hate that composers do sometimes. And Patrick's like, hey, I'm just going to put this in this study in abundance so that you're like never afraid of that or worried about it. And
that took my brain a long time to figure out. I'm very impressed that you thought about that beforehand, because So I suppose we should talk about the very beginning and just about that stroke at the very opening, should we? The very opening for me, it's weird because obviously that's a bowing mark rather than a slur, right? So in order for a real legato sound to happen, that I think the sound, you have to be very careful that the bow changes. So you're thinking about the left hand timing. Left hand, now bow and left hand, just left hand. So sometimes if you're not careful about it, you might get a kind of skitey rhythm instead of this beautiful, very even sound. So that idea about thinking about the rhythm in the left hand is quite important, I think.
Definitely. I love that.
Yeah.
I think as well, just because you mentioned the thing of, is this a bow stroke or is it a bowing or is it a sort of phrase marking? I do think because it comes back so many times, there is probably scope to play around with it and to do different things. Although I'm with you, I think I would start at legato and try to make it as connected as possible. So we have the clear idea of what it is, but we have an exact repetition of that comes back in 13. It's essentially two sort of bowings, right, that we have in this study, the two slurred, and then we have, also the same material that comes back or similar material with the longer slur. Yeah. And then I think that's really telling, right, is like this legato we achieve in the first bar. Can we achieve it with these longer bows, with the string crossing being more complicated? That happens in 33, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the shifts are sort of harder, I find, under the slur, right? We have to have a lot of control. You can get away with it more in some ways when you have, you're not worried about saving bow here as much at the beginning.
Yeah, I did. However, it's funny that you should mention that, because for me, I always think taking something out, like all of those bow changes, actually simplifies. So when it suddenly goes into 2 beats to a bow, I feel like it's much easier because I've less to think about.
Right.
I mean, lazy brain is on, So remove one problem and then we're solved. But when you say about the 2, I found bar 25 and 26 really interesting, because here.
Oh yeah.
I think, where was it? Oh yeah, I noticed it was 26. Here, I would often do and have a slurpy kind of shift going on, which was disgusting. So to leave it later and to still have it connected. So you do have to think about it at the end of the note. That kind of idea, but then speed up that motion, leave it later in the bow. But it's interesting because you do have to have a certain amount of coordination within your bow and your fingering when you just have those 2 note strokes. Really fascinating.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, right? I think it's this phenomenon of playing where it feels easier, right? Because we're not as concerned about saving the bow. But it doesn't actually mean it's easier physically, even if the feeling is easier. You might listen back and say, oh, actually, if you were kind of playing it through in an unconcentrated way and find that, oh, it doesn't actually sound as good because it's much busier motion-wise. So I think it's extra important to analyze stuff like your shifts and all the things you're talking about, legato, bow stroke, because it's easy to forget them.
Yeah, and also just because visually how it works, I think so at the very opening, I just think often because of you're changing the bow, you can have this feeling, and it's just because it's visually, but you would never sing it like that. So you could almost do a little exercise for yourself where you do light. Where you actually just give yourself a little bit more juice. Obviously, you never play it like that. But when you notice that you are actually playing that way, and then back. So that means then the connection is, you're just a bit more aware of it. I think this is a dangerous one because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Speaking of danger, I want to go back to the passage you were talking about previously. So I'm looking at 23 to 26. There's also just a lot of moments here where we need to analyze. This is a really quite a nice passage. It's got a nice sequence that happens where you ascend, you follow a pattern and you ascend by half steps. So we have the opening thing. And then it's the same thing. So then we have this beautiful pattern that happens. But then I think it's also finding these moments, right? We've talked about this so many times in the pauper studies, is where does the pattern change? And that for me is generally where I find more technical issues. And so here we have this ascending pattern in 23 and 24, but then in 25, the pattern changes direction and we're going down again. So it's a thing you were just pointing out with the slurpy shift. I think what even contributes to that more, right? And it's important to have that awareness as we practice these things, in isolation. But then when you're going through, having the awareness of when the pattern changes, that's also going to contribute to why the thing feels unnatural or more uncomfortable.
I totally agree. I also love the word slurpy. Just saying.
Slurpy.
There's something about
it's
it.
A good word.
Squidgy, slurpy.
There's a drink in America called a Slurpee. Did you ever have one?
What's in it?
At 7-Eleven. No. It's like a frozen. It's like a frozen drink thing. It's kind of like
I think I have had one. It's that weird. It's like a Mr. Freeze in Ireland, except crushed up Mr. Freeze. Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. It's like on a hot summer day. What's that?
Like it's also a brain freeze thing, right?
Yeah.
You know, like that's some dangerous juice.
Tons of sugar, more sugar than you should probably eat in a week in one of those.
Oh, God, I love it. Okay, what did you think about it's really funny because whenever I think of this kind of a passage, you know, suddenly we're yeah, I mean, like, and the Bach prelude, I mean, there's so many things where this is good and useful. How did you approach this bit?
It's a little more difficult than sometimes when you have this because you go quite high up on the D string. So I think the biggest challenge for me in this is, well, there's two things I think about. One is sort of what is the best position for your arm that you're going to efficiently be able to do these string crossings without moving too much. I actually have to say I probably tend to put my elbow a little lower on this one because the important note, the moving note, is on the lower string, right? So I think that's one issue. And I think the other issue is we'd want to be quite near the bridge, right, to get these lower notes to speak. But then the A string's going to sound probably not where we wanted to. So it's a compromise. I think these sort of string crossing techniques like this are a lot about compromise, both in the height of the arm and also the placement of the bow in relation to the bridge. Because you're gonna use a slightly more like nuanced positioning, I guess, than if you were only playing on the one string.
Yeah, I like it. I actually find this kind of technique comes up a lot in the repertoire. People love a good open string pedal. They just can't help themselves, you know. It just sounds cool.
I know.
So it happens all the time, and quite often you do have this, you know, no thumb. I can't put it down. Where I am. So I tend to do a relationship to where I am on the side of my arm, on the side of the cello. Which for me is really fascinating because then I feel a bit more grounded. So I just need to feel grounded somewhere when I'm putting it up those. And you can also ground a previous finger. So you can leave your first finger down, for example. So here, this underneath my wrist. That kind of idea. So you can find a way where you feel grounded and you don't feel like you're up skating on thin ice.
Yeah.
And just thinking about it from a different approach, if being attached to the cello somewhere else can help you, then think of that too. And like you say about the bowing as well, I totally cheat for this, and I actually tip up.
Oh.
So now only a tiny bit, but basically, because obviously if you adapt too much from your straight, then the sound is going to suffer. But you can actually do a kind of really so kind of chordy. It's like I'm doing a kind of bad A string angle.
Yeah.
You know. So if I remember to do that, so you have to actually practice to get it in. This is your moment. It does actually come out in a slightly brighter fashion if you can think about that, but then you do have to think about lightening on the A string as well.
Yeah.
So either way, it's kind of a balance, but I do think bar 27 is the time to get it. So you're already in the feel of up, down, like that.
Yeah, definitely.
And then that helps. Kind of like Piatti, like, right?
Oh yeah.
If you manage to get into that feel straight away. It's the same sense of feeling, just as slightly different.
I think that's an important thing to mention too, because it's sort of like you want to be able to just sort of set this stroke and then get in a groove with it. It's not the sort of stroke where you're consciously thinking about every single one. And just, I guess, one thing to add on that too, for me, I love that you think about where you are on the side of the cello. But what I tend to think about, because I let my thumb sort of float here, is, you know, and I see this a lot in students when they play in thumb position anyway, but so much it's about hand balance in this. You know, just because we don't have our thumb down, you want to make sure you're not like all of a sudden losing all the structure in the hand. You can still have quite a bit of that sort of, because I find that very grounding. A lot of times when something's not in tune or feels unsettled up high, it's usually for me because of the balance in the hand. And I think if you can try to focus on that as much as possible, despite the fact that the thumbs are there to help support, that's going to really help.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. And also then I did record this bit, and I realized that I was like, I had my American football player approach to it. You know, and I don't know what that says about American football players, because actually a lot of them are very graceful. I don't know why I said that, but it was the, you know, it's like the suddenly then you do have to think whatever they do. You know, so you are actually thinking about the line in some way.
Yeah, totally.
So that it doesn't all just suddenly go, oh, you know, I know you're thinking about something, but eventually, once you've done all the practice, go back. Really, what I need to do is I need to think about where I'm shifting. This is all fine. This note. And also, sometimes I cheat with my thumb on the side, just in case anyone else wants another for that area. So if you actually physically put it on the side of the fingerboard, that's another lovely cheat to make you feel more grounded wherever you can.
And you could do the thumb underneath too, even though it's not that high.
Underneath, as in
underneath the fingerboard. Underneath the fingerboard.
As in that way. Really?
Yeah.
I've never done that. Cool.
Have you not? Oh, I thought we talked about that in one of them. That was a big Starker thing. He called it 21st century.
Oh wow.
20th century thumb technique. Yeah. So if you're doing Kodai solo sonata with the trills, it's really good at that. And then you bring it up.
That's a great idea.
I don't use it nearly enough. I've known about it forever. Because it seems like totally cray-cray. But then once you get used to it, it's actually like, it's genius.
Yeah, of course. No, because all you need just a little bit of support. And sure, if it works behind here, why wouldn't it work behind here? It doesn't make any, like it makes perfect sense. I love it. Go Stucker.
Should we talk about this? Let's talk about these hard bars at the end. So for me, the one that kind of has the most pencil markings on it is 38.
Yes.
And I think one of the things, again, it's deceiving because you start this passage just like you've started the previous passages that come in the study. And then we change. So for me, it's two things. One, we have this sequence and we're shifting in the middle of each sequence. So that's already hard.
Yeah.
So getting that shift clear and knowing where your thumb is going or whichever finger you're using as a relation. And then I think the second aspect that's difficult is we have this quick succession of changing opened, closed, extended hand positions as we go. Yeah. And for me, just like sorting all that stuff out, oh my God, I mean, you could spend like hours trying to get this in tune without like thinking about that.
Yeah.
And it's still going to be hard. It's hard to get in tune, but it will save you so much time if you just do
a bit of homework. Yeah.
Do a bit of homework.
It's like your times tables at school. Just, your spelling bees, whatever they are, just learn your stuff in the background and then you'll be fine. I'm going to give you a laugh because I spent the whole week doing it in a stupid manner, like a full-blown stupid manner. And then this morning I was like, oh no, I should probably do it the way like I would do everything else. And then suddenly it was easy and I was like, not easy, but at least I was like, well, if I had that plan last week, then this would have sounded a lot better today. But I found it very amusing because basically I did and then I left my thumb there, stretched, moved up the thumb, and it was absolutely terrible. I mean, like the funny thing was I was kind of managing it, and then of course I was like, sometimes you do a bit of lazy practice where you're like, I'm not going to find a better solution. And that's what I did this week. And actually I should have. So eventually, this, like when you just shift up one, what's the next one? The last one's the semitone. So really, if you just know your thumb, and so obviously that's solved, it's much, much, much easier.
It's probably done you loads of good to practice, though, for some other random thing you'll have to do.
Do you know, it actually was really interesting because I was like, oh, I wonder, like, can this work? And I just don't know why I didn't just bin it instantly, but like there was something in me that I was like, okay, let's see, can I do it? It's kind of like a crab scenario, but like complete waste of my time. Absolutely. And let that be a lesson to me and everybody watching that if something is ridiculous, there's probably a better solution, and don't waste your time doing it. Sometimes I'm just mental. But I thought I'd put that out there because everyone does it.
We all do it. And also, it's like those preconceived notions of like what's efficient and what's better. I mean, I remember in like Marriage of Figaro, I remember I used to do fingering. I used to think, I can't remember now what it was, but I was convinced that this was the best, most efficient fingering. And I could never play it in an audition. I'd always, and then I like changed it. I was like, why don't you just like go with this thing that you think is the most efficient? Yeah. And suddenly it worked. It's really funny. I mean, there's so much of that it's also, it's very personal, but we have to try these different things to actually know what works for us and what doesn't.
We do, and do you know what? Maybe my crazy fingering would work very well for someone who doesn't like the other one, but it's probably unlikely. Let's not kid ourselves.
Probably, but you never know. You never know.
So yeah, I found that really fascinating, that bar. How did you approach it in the same way as far as? So just really the last one. So it's all tones. If you can remember, the last one's a semitone.
Yeah, and I actually found that the shifty part wasn't the most challenging for me. It was more the being really organized about which intervals are happening here. So that, again, what I would call a closed position. So the half steps between 2 and 3. Then the next one, the half steps between 1 and 2. We've got a whole step. And then this, we have 2 whole steps. So that's between, after the shift, basically, the fingerings, finger distances. That's what I found the hardest. Because each one changes and it's in quick succession.
And also where it is, I mean, for me, what I try and do is see, is there just one that's different? If I can, because I don't want to give myself too much information, because your brain just at a certain point checks out and goes like, I'm off for a cup of tea. It doesn't matter, like it's just brain overload. So you can separate it all out, and that's why we do that in practice. But I would have definitely thought about so tone, semitone, and so it's only one of them. But it's all about the placement as well, like you say. There's just so many levels, so you have to go through.
That's
each
a great way.
And work it out very carefully.
Actually, your way of thinking about it is more efficient, I think, definitely, because you're only thinking about the tone and the semitone, whereas I was sort of thinking about the whole hand structure, but you don't need it actually.
Yeah, and there's only one semitone in there, so if you remember everything else is big, then you're fine. The problem is that those two things happen at different times. So your last semitone in your thumb is at the very end. But your last semitone in your fingers is, what is that, 2 before that? One. So so it's just really getting yourself organized. If I had several weeks for this, I would have just repeated it a lot until my brain just organized itself. But yeah, sure, we'll see what happens. What about the very end?
Yeah, so this whole playing back and forth with the major and the minor. It's all things
quite cool.
It is very cool. And it's hard to do it really well. Again, it's all the things we've talked about so much in these poppers. So I'm not playing the right notes, but the rotation in the hand for getting the fourth finger.
Fourth finger.
It's really key. And again, hand balance. I think a lot of times we can like try to force through the intonation and like really kill ourselves to get things in tune. Whereas just a slight like shift in perspective about what's actually feels centered and grounded is going to be more in tune and more reliable. So taking the time, even though it might not feel efficient when you're practicing it, but taking the time to actually sort of, and again, that's totally a different, depending on your hand. I only am saying for myself, but I would need a lot of rotation for my fourth finger.
Definitely. And I found my placement of the thumb actually all over this study really grounded me. So if I managed to get in bar 39 that thumb in tune and this, if I managed to get those two together, I always found, because I'm trying to reach higher, my first finger wants to go a little bit higher than it should be in the pitch, have that as my pedal.
Yeah.
And I always come back and listen to that. And that was very particular at the very last bar. See, every time I have my hand that direction, when I come back over, it seems to want to just... So I really need to plan. And then our very last note, I had to plant my finger before I started.
Oh, interesting. And you reached for it, did you? That last one.
I did, yeah. What did you do? Oh, you shifted.
I shifted.
Ooh, fancy. No, I basically was like, bang, go. You know,
that's
only
impressive.
Because lazycellist.com again, you know. And
I think that's I think that's kind of like a power chord. Like it's like, well, like I can do that.
Yeah, and then obviously the last chord as well. You know, that's in order to ring that. You really have to have a balanced hand, right? And if you do actually give too much juice to one or the other, then that will pull it out of the pitch as well. So being able to stay cool enough in the head to go, ba, your vibrato is nice and small at the beginning, because we don't want, you know, none of that. Just to kind of relax your arm, stay in your actual release, and then have enough kind of, is it going to be in tune?
Well, that's the thing. It's also the whole like, oh yeah, I got to the end, and then, but wait, you still have the last chord, so don't give up yet. Yes, take the time and care to really place that.
Yes, so concentration till the end. I mean, if we can ever learn anything, they're good lessons to learn, right?
Yep. He knew what he was doing, Popper. He really did.
He did. Fair play to him. He did.
Yeah.
Is it time? Is it?
I think it's time. Ow! That was gorgeous.
Oh,
my God.
thank you.
You always bring out so much music in these.
Oh, well.
Especially the like juicy harmony bits. I'm like, oh yeah. Yay!
Really nice. It is kind of a cute one, isn't it?
Woohoo!
Yay!
Go on.
See
So
you
see you
soon,
next
Kate.
time.
Bye.
Woohoo! Bye.